The morning in Ventura began with the familiar sound of the surf and the cries of seagulls above the harbor. Nicole Kelly stood in front of the mirror in the bathroom, carefully applying foundation under her left eye. The bruise had almost disappeared, but she still covered up the last yellowish traces. It was a habit she had developed over the years. Morgan had already left for work at 5 in the morning. His shift at the port terminal warehouse started early. The mirror reflected a 43-year-old woman with tired brown eyes and carefully styled chestnut hair. Nicole always took care of her appearance. Morgan demanded it. "You represent our family," he often said. At the Fresh Mart on Main Street, where she had worked as a cashier for 8 years, Nicole was known for her constant smile and impeccable appearance. Kelly's house on Oak Avenue looked exemplary. It was a small, one-story house with a neat lawn that Morgan mowed every weekend on schedule. White shutters, fresh paint, perfectly trimmed bushes. The neighbors considered them a model family. Nicole knew that's how it was supposed to look from the outside. The day at the store began as usual. Regular customers greeted Nicole by name, and she remembered the preferences of many of them. Mrs. Rodriguez always bought skim milk and whole-grain bread. Old Man Harris bought the same frozen meals for one. Families with children stocked up for the week, filling their carts with cereal and juice. "How's it going, Nikki?" asked Sharon, a colleague from the neighboring checkout. "You left early yesterday. Is everything okay?" Nicole froze for a second. Yesterday, Morgan had unexpectedly shown up at the store an hour before her shift. He said he would drive her home, even though she usually took the bus. The manager let her leave early because there weren't many customers. "Everything's fine. Morgan just decided to give me a ride," she replied with her usual smile. Sharon nodded and returned to her customers. Nicole didn't mention that on the way home, Morgan had questioned her about who she had been talking to at work. He had seen her laughing with a young customer while helping him find the right product. "What did he say to you? Why were you smiling like that? Were you flirting with him?" The questions came one after another until they got home. Detective James Coleman came into the store at lunchtime. He was a short, 52-year-old man with gray streaks in his dark hair and attentive gray eyes. He had been shopping there for many years, ever since he moved to Ventura from Los Angeles. He worked at the local police department investigating serious crimes in the county. "Good afternoon, Detective Coleman," Nicole greeted him, scanning the barcodes on his usual purchases. Coffee, bread, canned soups, eggs. A bachelor's diet. "Good afternoon, Nicole. How are you?" "Not bad, thanks. How about you?" "Things busy." Coleman shrugged. He didn't like discussing work with civilians, but Nicole was always friendly and never pried. Something about her manner seemed familiar to him, cautious, wanting to avoid attention. Over the years on the force, he had learned to recognize certain signs, just the usual routine. "Have a good day, Nicole." "You too, Detective." After work, Nicole stopped by the grocery store as usual and bought food for dinner. Morgan loved fried chicken on Wednesdays. She knew his food preferences well. 14 years of marriage had taught her all his habits and requirements. Any deviation from the usual menu irritated him. The bus took her to a stop 2 blocks from her house. On the way, Nicole met Thomas Wright, a social worker from the Ventura County Family Assistance Center. He was coming from the Johnson's house, a family he had been working with since a domestic violence incident a month ago. "Hi, Nicole," he smiled. Thomas was 8 years younger than her, an energetic man with a sincere desire to help people. They knew each other superficially. They met at the store and sometimes greeted each other on the street. "Hi, Thomas. Workday?" "Yes, checking in on my clients." He paused for a second to look at her face. It was a professional habit. He was good at noticing things others chose not to see. "Are you okay? You look tired." "Just a tough day at the store," Nicole replied quickly. "A lot of customers." Thomas nodded, but something in her tone made him mentally note the moment. In his work, it was important to trust his intuition. At home, Nicole quickly set about making dinner. Morgan would be back at 6:30. He had a strict routine. Shower, change into his home clothes, Dinner at 7 sharp. She set the table using his favorite dishes and sat down to wait. Morgan Kelly was a large 46-year-old man with broad shoulders and calloused hands from manual labor. At the warehouse, he was respected as a reliable employee, always on time, never complaining, doing his job without unnecessary conversation. His colleagues knew him as a quiet family man who rarely participated in after-work get-togethers. "How was your day?" he asked, sitting down at the table. "Good. Lots of customers, but I managed. How was yours?" "Fine. New shipment from Asia. Lots of work." They ate dinner in silence. Nicole studied his face, trying to gauge his mood. Morgan seemed calm, but she had long since learned to recognize the subtle signs of his irritation, the tension in his shoulders, a certain look in his eyes, the tone of his voice. "Thomas Wright spoke to me on the street today," she said, deciding to tell him about it right away. Morgan looked up. His gray eyes turned cold. What did he want? "Nothing special, just said hello. Asked how I was doing." "And what did you say?" "That I had a hard day at the store." "Did you say anything else?" "No, that's all." He was just going about his business. Morgan finished his chicken in silence. Nicole knew he would remember this information. Tomorrow, he might find a reason to drive past the place where they talked, or ask one of the neighbors. He always checked her words. After dinner, Nicole washed the dishes while Morgan watched the news. It was their usual evening ritual. At 9, he switched to the sports channel, which was broadcasting a baseball game. Nicole sat down next to him on the sofa, picking up her knitting. She had been knitting a scarf for several months, but progress was slow. She didn't have much time. "Why is it taking so long?" Morgan asked, nodding at the scarf. "When will you finish?" "Soon. Maybe by winter. You need to hurry up. There's no need to drag it out." Nicole nodded and quickened her movements with the needles. Morgan didn't like it when things dragged on. Everything had to be in order, on schedule, with results. Before going to bed, he checked the locks on all the doors and windows. Another habit. Nicole knew that it wasn't just about home security. Morgan controlled all the exits. He always kept the car keys with him. Nicole didn't have her own car. Morgan considered it an unnecessary expense. Lying in bed, Nicole listened to his steady breathing. Morgan fell asleep quickly. Physical work at the warehouse was exhausting. She often lay awake, thinking about the past day and planning for tomorrow. She had to be careful with every word, every gesture. Mistakes led to questions, and questions led to accusations and punishment. At Ventura General Hospital, Dr. Emily Hart was finishing her shift in the trauma unit. She had been working there for 5 years after moving from San Francisco. A 39-year-old woman with short red hair and a determined character, she chose trauma because she wanted to help people in critical situations. Over the years, Dr. Hart had seen many cases of domestic violence. Women came in with accidents, falling down the stairs, hitting a door, falling off a bike. She learned to recognize certain types of injuries and patterns of behavior. Most victims refused to tell the truth, fearing the consequences. That evening, the ward was relatively quiet. A few cases, sports injuries, kitchen cuts, one patient with a suspected heart attack. The usual work of a small provincial hospital. Dr. Hart did not know that she was about to encounter a case that would change her perception of what a person is capable of in their desire to control and punish another person. 2 weeks had passed since Thomas Wright had spoken to Nicole on the street. During that time, life at Kelly's house had taken on a new tension. Morgan began asking more questions about her workday, demanding detailed reports on every conversation she had with customers. The evening interrogations became longer and more detailed. "How long did you talk to that man in the blue shirt?" he would ask when he returned home after his checks. Morgan began to stop by the store almost every day, ostensibly for small purchases, but in reality to watch his wife. A minute, maybe 2. "He was looking for baby food for his grandson," Nicole replied, trying to remain calm. "Why were you smiling at him?" "I smile at all customers, Morgan. It's my job. These conversations always ended the same way. Morgan found something suspicious, something wrong in her behavior. Sometimes it was just words, accusations of flirting, of wanting to attract men's attention, of disrespecting their marriage. Sometimes the words turned into actions. The bruise under Nicole's eye, which she covered with foundation in the first chapter, appeared after one such conversation. Morgan hit her when she tried to explain that talking to customers was part of her job. "Don't you dare argue with me," he said then, and Nicole realized that the rules of the game had changed. She became even more cautious at the store. Her smiles became more formal, her conversations shorter. Sharon noticed the changes. "You seem tense, Nikki. Is everything okay at home?" "Everything's fine, I'm just tired," Nicole replied, avoiding direct eye contact. But Sharon wasn't the only one who noticed something. Detective Coleman, who regularly bought groceries at the store, also saw the changes. Nicole became more withdrawn, her usual friendliness replaced by professional politeness. When he talked to her about the weather or local news, she answered in monosyllables, constantly looking around. One morning, while buying coffee before his shift, Coleman noticed Nicole flinch as he approached her register. It was the reaction of someone expecting a blow. In 25 years on the force, he had seen it 1,000 times. "Nicole," he said quietly as he handed her the money, "if you ever need help, you know where to find me." She glanced up at him quickly, and he saw a mixture of gratitude and fear in her eyes. "Thank you, Detective." "But I'm fine." Coleman took his change and purchases, but paused for a second. "My offer stands, always." After he left, Nicole stood there, clenching her hands tightly. Part of her wanted to run after him, to tell him everything. But another part, the part that had been intimidated by years of psychological pressure, whispered about the consequences. Morgan would find out. He always did. At home, the situation was getting worse. Morgan had established new rules. Nicole had to call him every 2 hours during work and report on what was happening. If she forgot or was late with a call, his anger was terrifying. "Do you think I'm stupid?" he yelled when she once called 15 minutes late. "Do you think I don't understand what you're doing behind my back?" "Morgan, there was a line. I couldn't leave the customers. Don't lie to me." He grabbed her by the shoulders and shook her. "I saw you talking to that cop. What did he tell you?" Nicole realized that he had been watching her even when she thought he was at work. Maybe he had taken time off to spy on her. Maybe he had asked someone to watch her. The feeling of being constantly watched began to weigh on her. The attempt to seek help came unexpectedly. It happened a month after her conversation with Detective Coleman. Nicole was walking home from work when she saw Thomas Wright near the community center. He was talking to a middle-aged woman who was crying. Nicole recognized her as a neighbor from the next street. When the woman left, Thomas noticed Nicole. "Hi," he said. "Tough day?" Something in his voice, professional kindness, genuine concern, broke down her defenses. "Thomas," she began, then stopped. The words stuck in her throat. "I need someone to talk to." He understood immediately. In his line of work, moments like this happened often, when a person balanced on the edge between silence and asking for help. "Of course. Would you like to come to the center? It's quiet there. No one else is around." Nicole looked around, checking to see if anyone was watching her. It was a habit that had become second nature. "I don't know if anyone will see us. Let's just walk around. It will look like we're just out for a stroll." They walked down a quiet street, and Nicole began to talk. Not everything at once. Years of silence couldn't be broken in a single conversation. But she told him about the constant control, the questions, the fear of doing something wrong, about how Morgan demanded reports on her every move. "That's called emotional abuse," Thomas said gently. "What's happening to you is wrong. It's a form of domestic violence." "But he doesn't hit me," Nicole said, although that wasn't entirely true. "The beatings happened, but rarely, and she had learned to think of them as her fault. Violence isn't always physical. Control, isolation, constant accusations, those are also forms of violence. They reached a small park, and Nicole finally decided to tell him about the recent incident. 3 days ago, Morgan came home and accused her of deliberately buying the wrong kind of bread. His rage was disproportionate to the offense. He yelled for 2 hours, accusing her of disrespect, of trying to get him, of only thinking about herself. Then he locked her in the bedroom and didn't let her out until morning. "We have programs to help you," Thomas said. "Counseling, temporary shelter, legal support. You're not alone in this." "He'll find out," Nicole whispered. "If I do anything, he'll find out, and then it will be even worse." Thomas nodded. He had heard this hundreds of times before. "We can develop a safety plan, gradually, carefully. The most important thing is your safety." But when they said goodbye and Nicole went home, fear took hold of her again. What if Morgan had seen them talking? What if someone told him? At home, she nervously prepared dinner, going over possible explanations in her head. Morgan came home at the usual time, but he was in a dark mood. There had been a conflict at the warehouse with a new employee, a young guy who, in Morgan's opinion, wasn't working hard enough. "These young people think they're entitled to everything," he grumbled over dinner. "No respect for work, no respect for their elders." Nicole listened silently, but her thoughts were on her conversation with Thomas. For the first time in many years, someone had called her situation what it was: abuse. For the first time, someone had offered real help. After dinner, Morgan went to take a shower and Nicole quickly checked her phone. Thomas had sent her a message with the hotline number for a domestic violence shelter. "Call when you're ready." Anytime. She quickly deleted the message, but memorized the number. That night, lying next to her sleeping husband, Nicole allowed herself to think about the possibility of a different life for the first time in years. Maybe she could leave. Maybe she could be free. But these thoughts frightened her almost as much as her current situation. The next day at the hospital, Dr. Emily Hart was treating a patient with a suspected broken rib. The woman claimed she had fallen down the stairs, but the nature of her injuries and her behavior suggested otherwise. This was the third such accident in a month. "Mrs. Johnson," Dr. Hart said gently, "sometimes it can be unsafe at home. If you need help." "No, doctor," the woman replied quickly. "I'm just clumsy." "I always have been." Emily nodded, but made a note in the patient's chart. The hospital had a protocol for such cases, but it was impossible to get people to tell the truth. After her shift, Dr. Hart stopped at the grocery store. She didn't know Nicole personally, but she often saw her at the checkout. The usually cheerful cashier looked particularly tired and tense today. "Good evening," Emily said, as she placed her groceries on the conveyor belt. "Good evening," Nicole replied, avoiding direct eye contact. As Dr. Hart handed over the money, she noticed a bruise on Nicole's wrist, fresh, purple, clearly from being squeezed hard. Nicole quickly hid her hand, but it was too late. Their eyes met for a second, and Emily saw both a plea for help and fear in them. "Take care of yourself," the doctor said, taking the change. "Thank you," Nicole whispered. After the customer left, Nicole stood there, adjusting the sleeves of her blouse with trembling hands. Everyone notices, everyone sees. Soon it will reach Morgan. And then, that evening, Morgan was unusually affectionate at home. He brought flowers, a bouquet of cheap carnations from the supermarket, and apologized for his nervousness last week. "I'm just worried about you," he said, hugging her. "You understand, don't you? I love you, and I don't want anyone to hurt you." It was a familiar cycle. After a period of tension and violence, there was always a honeymoon period. Apologies, gifts, promises that everything would change. Nicole knew this pattern by heart, but each time she hoped that this time it would be real. But by the end of the week, everything was back to normal. Morgan started asking questions again, checking up on her, watching her. Nicole realized that the situation was not improving. It was only getting worse. The honeymoon periods were getting shorter, and the periods of control and aggression were getting longer and more intense. She memorized the phone number Thomas gave her but never decided to call. Her fear of Morgan's revenge was stronger than her desire for freedom. For now. However, she did not know that the time for gradual change was coming to an end. Morgan also felt that he was losing control. He saw how people looked at Nicole, noticed their sympathetic glances. His paranoid thoughts became more and more obsessive. He began to plan something radical, something final, something that would solve the problem once and for all. The trigger was a letter. It was a routine postal notification that the Ventura County Family Assistance Center was offering free counseling for women experiencing difficulties in their family relationships. Letters like this were sent out throughout the area, a standard information campaign by social services. Morgan brought the mail home from work, as always looking through all the letters before giving them to Nicole. When he saw the envelope with the Family Assistance Center logo, his face turned to stone. "What's this?" He held the letter in front of her face. Nicole glanced at the envelope and felt her heart sink. It was a mass mailing, but Morgan didn't know that. "I don't know. Probably some kind of advertising letter." Advertising? Morgan slowly opened the envelope, keeping his eyes on her. About family assistance? About relationship difficulties? He read the letter, his face growing darker and darker. At the end was the signature of Thomas Wright as program coordinator. "Your friend Thomas sent you an invitation." His voice was dangerously quiet. "Do you think I don't understand what's going on?" "Morgan, it's a mass mailing. Everyone in the neighborhood gets these letters. Don't lie to me." He grabbed her chin, forcing her to look him in the eyes. "You complained about me to that social worker. You told him about our family." "No, What did you tell him? That I treat you badly? That I don't give you any freedom?" Morgan let go of her and started pacing around the kitchen. Nicole could see his brain working, building logical chains from his paranoid fantasies. "Now I understand why that cop was looking at you so strangely. Why the doctor at the hospital was asking Mrs. Johnson questions. You're all in on it. Everyone is against me. Morgan, please listen. How many people have you turned against me? How many lies have you told?" He stopped in front of her, and Nicole saw something in his eyes she had never seen before. Not just anger or suspicion. It was something cold, final, determination. "You wanted attention?" he said quietly. "Did you want everyone to feel sorry for you? Did you want to make me look like a monster? I didn't accuse anyone of anything. Now everyone will know the truth about who you really are. A liar, a traitor." Morgan didn't sleep that night. Nicole heard him pacing around the house, planning something. In the morning, he left for work as usual, but his behavior had changed. He became too calm, too focused. The next day, when he came home from work, he said, "I have tomorrow off. Let's go to my uncle's cottage and spend the weekend together, away from all these people who are trying to destroy our family." Morgan's uncle had a small cottage 20 miles from Ventura, in a hilly area. It was an old house that was rarely used, with a large barn that once stored equipment for a small farm. Morgan visited there sometimes to help with repairs. "I don't know, maybe we should just stay home." Nicole tried to object. Something in his tone frightened her. "We're going," he said firmly. "Pack your things." On Saturday morning, they set off in Morgan's old pickup truck. The drive took about an hour. The cottage was in a remote location, with the nearest neighbors several miles away. It was the perfect place for privacy, or for no one to hear the screams. "Why are we here?" Nicole asked when they parked outside the house. "We need to talk. Seriously talk." Without witnesses, her uncle's house was locked, but Morgan knew where the spare key was. Inside, it smelled musty and dusty. Old furniture covered with dust covers, photographs on the walls. "Morgan, I don't like it here. Let's go home." "Home?" He turned to her. Where's our home, Nicole? Where you make plans to run away from me? Where you tell strangers what a bad husband I am?" She tried to walk to the door, but he blocked her way. "I want you to understand something," he said, taking his work phone out of his pocket. "I recorded our conversation with Thomas Wright a week ago. Do you know how easy it is to install a listening app on your phone?" Nicole felt the ground slip away from under her feet. He had heard their entire conversation. He knew what she had told Thomas. "Did you think I was stupid? Did you think I wouldn't notice you scheming behind my back? Morgan, you just wanted to destroy me. You wanted me arrested as a domestic abuser. You wanted to take the house, the money, start a new life." He moved closer to her, and Nicole backed away until her back hit the wall. "But I figured out how to solve this problem, how to make everyone understand the truth." "What truth?" "The truth about what really happened. About how my wife decided to leave me and disappeared. How she left home and never came back. No one would ever know what really happened to her." Nicole realized he was going to kill her. Here, in this abandoned place where no one would find them. "Morgan, please don't do this. We can talk about it." "Talk about it? With a liar and a traitor?" Number. The time for talking was over. He took a coil of rope and a roll of duct tape out of his bag. Nicole tried to run, but he was stronger and faster. He grabbed her, threw her to the floor, and tied her hands and feet. "Don't scream," he said, taping her mouth shut. "No one will hear you anyway." He picked her up and carried her to the back door of the house. Nicole tried to break free, but the ropes were tied tightly. Behind the house was a large shed, and in the shed was an industrial freezer. It was huge, old, but still working. Her uncle had once used it to store meat during hunting seasons. "Do you know what this is?" Morgan asked, opening the freezer door. Inside, it was empty and very cold. "This is your new bedroom. Here you will think about what you have done." He lowered her into the freezer. The metal walls were covered with frost, and the temperature was around -10 degrees. "Morgan, no!" She tried to scream through the tape, but only muffled sounds came out. "I'll leave you here for a while," he said, looking down at her. "Maybe a week, or 2, until you realize what a mistake you've made." Nicole tried to explain to him that she could die from the cold, but he didn't listen. "And then, when I decide you've thought enough about your actions, we'll see if it's worth letting you out." He slammed the freezer door shut. Nicole heard the lock click. He had locked her out. Then she heard his footsteps receding from the shed. The freezer was pitch black. The cold immediately began to penetrate her body. Nicole realized that if she didn't find a way out, she would die here. The first day was the worst. She tried to free herself from the ropes, but Morgan had tied them professionally. The more she struggled, the tighter they got. The tape over her mouth prevented her from screaming, but even if she could, no one would hear her here. The cold was unbearable. Her body was shaking so badly that she couldn't control her muscles. Her fingers and toes began to go numb. Her breath turned into clouds of steam that settled on the walls of the freezer. By the second day, she realized that Morgan had no intention of letting her go. This wasn't punishment. It was attempted murder. Slow, agonizing attempted murder. On the third day, she began to lose consciousness periodically. Her body was trying to conserve heat by slowing down all its processes. Nicole knew she was going into hypothermia. Soon, she would slip into a coma, and then she would die. But something inside her refused to give up. Maybe it was her survival instinct. Maybe it was anger at Morgan for bringing them to this point. Or maybe it was just the stubbornness of a woman who had allowed herself to be controlled for too long. On the fourth day, she managed to partially free one arm. The ropes had weakened from the moisture that formed from her breath and then froze. She began to methodically work on the knots, despite her numb fingers. The fifth day was critical. Nicole hardly remembered it. Her consciousness came and went, but her hands were almost free. She managed to remove the tape from her lips, but breathing did not become easier. The air in the freezer was thin. On the 6th day, she realized she was dying. Her heart was beating slower and slower. Her body was barely trembling, a bad sign with hypothermia. But she also realized something else. Old freezers like this one had an emergency opening system on the inside, a lever or button for cases when someone accidentally got locked in. With her weak hands, she began to feel along the walls of the freezer. In the left corner, near the bottom, her fingers found a small metal lever, the emergency opening mechanism. The 7th day began with Nicole gathering all her remaining strength and pulling the lever. Nothing happened. She tried again, putting all the desperate anger of the last week into the movement. The mechanism worked. The freezer lid lifted a few inches. The sunlight seemed to her the brightest she had ever seen. The warm air of the barn, the hottest. She crawled out of the freezer and collapsed on the floor, unable to stand. But she was alive. Nicole didn't know how long she lay on the barn floor, coming to. The sun was shining through the windows. It was daytime. She heard the sound of a car pulling up to the house. Morgan was back. She realized she only had minutes. If he found her here, he would kill her immediately. No more games, no more freezers. He would just kill her. On shaky legs, Nicole made her way to the back door of the barn. Fortunately, it was unlocked. Going outside, she saw a path leading into the forest. It was her only chance. She ran. Or rather, she tried to run. Her legs refused to obey her, her body weakened by 7 days in the freezer. But adrenaline and the instinct to survive pushed her forward. Behind her, she heard Morgan's shout. He had discovered the empty freezer. Nicole. Nicole, where are you? Come back immediately. She didn't turn around. The forest was dense, full of hiding places. If she could get to the road, to people. The sound of breaking branches behind her told her that Morgan was chasing her. He was stronger and faster, but she knew these places. They had come here several times before. Half an hour later, she reached the highway. The first car she saw stopped. The driver, an elderly man, saw at a glance that something terrible had happened. "Help me," Nicole whispered. "Please take me to the hospital." Dr. Emily Hart was on duty at Ventura Hospital. When Nicole was brought in, frostbitten, emaciated, and suffering from severe hypothermia, Dr. Hart immediately recognized her as the supermarket cashier. "What happened to her?" she asked the paramedic. "She was found on the road." She says her husband locked her in the freezer for a week. Dr. Hart immediately began resuscitation efforts. Nicole's condition was critical. Her body temperature had dropped to dangerously low levels, and her limbs were beginning to freeze. "Call the police," she told the nurse, "and hurry." While the doctors fought for Nicole's life, Detective Coleman received a call about an attempted murder. When he arrived at the hospital and learned the details, his face turned to stone. He knew this woman. He had offered her help, and now she was between life and death because he had failed to recognize how dangerous her situation was. "Will she survive?" he asked Dr. Hart. "I don't know yet. The next 24 hours will tell, but the fact that she was able to get out and make it to the road after 7 days in a freezer is a miracle." "What about her husband? They're looking for him. He's gone. Morgan Kelly is indeed missing." When the police arrived at the cottage, they found an empty house and a freezer with signs of someone having been inside. Morgan's pickup truck was gone. Nicole slowly regained consciousness in the intensive care unit, surrounded by monitors and tubes. The first thing she saw was Dr. Hart's face. "You're safe," the doctor said quietly. "You're in the hospital. He can't hurt you anymore." Nicole tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't obey her. 7 days of silence in the freezer had taken their toll. "Don't try to talk," Dr. Hart said. "Rest. You've been through hell, but you survived. You're stronger than you thought." Nicole closed her eyes. For the first time in many years, she felt safe. Morgan couldn't get to her here. The police were looking for him. She was free. But freedom, as she would soon learn, comes at a price. Morgan Kelly sat in his pickup truck on a deserted road 15 miles from Ventura, staring at the city lights in the distance. For 3 weeks, he had been hiding in motels and abandoned buildings, eating from vending machines and cheap diners. He was running out of money. The police were looking for him. But most importantly, he couldn't get the thought out of his head that Nicole had outsmarted him. She should have died in that freezer. 7 days is more than a person can withstand at that temperature. But she survived. What's more, she got out and is now telling everyone her version of events. She was portraying him as a monster. She was destroying his reputation. An old country song was playing on the pickup's radio. Morgan turned off the music and started the engine. He had made up his mind. If he was going to be on the run for the rest of his life anyway, he might as well finish what he had started. Morgan knew the hospital's schedule. He knew that security there was minimal, especially at night. He would park the pickup a few blocks away and walk through the service entrance, which he remembered from when he worked on the construction site and did repairs there 5 years ago. He would find Nicole's room and finish what he couldn't finish in the freezer. But when he drove up to the hospital, he saw a figure he didn't expect to see. A middle-aged woman was standing at the service entrance, smoking a cigarette. In the light of the street lamp, he could see her face. It was Dr. Hart. Morgan hid in the shadows and watched. The doctor threw away her cigarette butt and headed for the entrance, but then stopped, as if she had heard something. She turned around and saw him in the darkness. They stood there for a few seconds, looking at each other. Then Dr. Hart slowly approached him. Morgan Kelly? Her voice was surprisingly calm for a woman who had encountered a wanted criminal in a dark alley. Doctor, what are you doing here? Morgan didn't answer. His hand fumbled for the knife in his jacket pocket, the same one he had intended to use on Nicole. You came for her, Dr. Hart said. It wasn't a question. She's alive because of you. She's alive because of her own willpower. Morgan took a step forward. Dr. Hart didn't back down. Your wife told me what you did to her. For years. Not just about the freezer. You don't know the whole truth. I know enough. Morgan pulled out the knife. The blade flashed in the light of the lantern. I won't let you hurt her anymore, Dr. Hart said. What happened next took less than a minute. When it was over, Morgan Kelly was lying on the asphalt with a knife in his chest, and Dr. Hart was standing over him, looking at the blood on her hands. She picked up the knife, the one he had threatened her with, and slowly entered the hospital through the service entrance. In the doctor's lounge, she washed her hands thoroughly, changed into clean clothes, and threw her blood-stained uniform into a medical waste container, which would be picked up for disposal the next day. Then Dr. Hart returned to her patients as if nothing had happened. The body was not discovered until morning, when an orderly went out for a smoke in the same alley. Police and forensic investigators cordoned off the area around the hospital. Detective Coleman arrived at the scene around 9 in the morning, holding a cup of coffee he hadn't had time to finish. Morgan Kelly lay in a pool of dried blood. One stab wound to the heart. Death was instantaneous. The knife was lying next to the body, an ordinary kitchen knife that could be bought in any store. No witnesses, no surveillance cameras in this part of the hospital grounds. What do we have? Coleman asked the forensic scientist. A man, 46 years old, one stab wound, right in the heart. Professional. The killer knew anatomy, or just got lucky on the first try. Time of death? Preliminary, between midnight and 2 in the morning. Coleman examined the body, then the area around it. No signs of a struggle. Morgan was a big man, but he was killed quickly and quietly. Detective, the police officer called to him. There's something interesting here. In Morgan's jacket pocket, they found Nicole Kelly's hospital card with her room number and a map of the hospital corridors. He came for her, Coleman realized. He wanted to finish what he started, but someone got in his way. Someone who knew why Morgan came to the hospital and didn't let it happen. At the hospital, Nicole walked slowly down the corridor, leaning on her cane. After 3 weeks in intensive care and another 2 weeks in a regular ward, her body was beginning to recover. The frostbite had gone, her body temperature had returned to normal, but she was still weak. Dr. Hart said this was normal after such an injury. Nicole didn't know what had happened that night at the service entrance. She didn't know Morgan was dead. She was still afraid he might show up, that the police wouldn't be able to find him, that he would come back to finish what he had started. Dr. Hart came into the ward, as she usually did during her morning rounds. She looked a little tired, but otherwise normal. "How are you feeling today?" "Better. It's easier to walk." "Good. I think we'll be able to discharge you by the end of the week." Nicole nodded, but there was anxiety in her eyes. "Doctor, what if Morgan finds me when I leave here?" Dr. Hart sat down on a chair next to the bed. "Nicole, you don't need to be afraid of him anymore." "How do you know?" "The police haven't caught him." "They have. Last night." It was a lie, but Dr. Hart said it so convincingly that Nicole believed her. "Really? Really? Morgan will never be able to hurt you again." For the first time in weeks, Nicole cried tears of relief instead of pain. Detective Coleman had been interviewing hospital staff all afternoon. Most of the night shift employees hadn't seen or heard anything suspicious. The service entrance was rarely used, mostly by smokers and those who wanted to sneak out for some fresh air. Dr. Hart was on the list of those who worked the night of the murder. When Coleman found her in the doctor's lounge, she was filling out medical charts. "Dr. Hart?" "Detective Coleman. May I ask you a few questions?" "Of course." "Were you working last night?" "Yes, I was on duty in trauma." "Did you leave the building at any time?" Dr. Hart paused as if trying to remember. "Yes, I went out for a smoke around midnight. At the service entrance. Did you see anything suspicious?" "No, nothing. It was quiet." "Did you know Morgan Kelly personally?" "Only as a patient's husband. Nicole told me about him." "What exactly did she tell you? About domestic violence? That he controlled her, threatened her, that he locked her in the freezer?" Coleman nodded, taking notes. "In your opinion, could anyone have wanted to kill Morgan Kelly?" Dr. Hart shrugged. "After what he did to his wife?" "I think many people could, but murder is a serious step. Thank you for your time." When the detective left, Dr. Hart returned to her notes. Her hands were completely steady. A week later, Nicole was discharged from the hospital. She had no home. The police had sealed off the house on Oak Avenue as a crime scene. Thomas Wright helped her settle into a temporary shelter for victims of domestic violence, a small house on the outskirts of Ventura that could accommodate up to 10 women with children. "This is only temporary," he explained, helping her carry her few belongings. "Until you get back on your feet, find a job, and your own place to live." Nicole nodded as she listened to him, but her mind was elsewhere. Dr. Hart had said that Morgana had been caught. But then why was no one telling her the details? Why was there no trial, no news in the papers? 5 other women lived in the shelter. They all had similar stories. Husbands who beat them, controlled them, threatened them. They were all trying to start a new life. Nicole quickly realized that her story with the freezer was the most extreme, but not unique in its essence. Maria, a 30-year-old woman with 2 children, said that her husband broke her arm when she tried to leave for the first time. Susan, 45, showed scars from cigarette burns. Each had her own story of survival. "The hardest thing," Maria said at dinner, "is to believe that you deserve better. After so many years of being told that you are worthless." Nicole understood what she was talking about. 14 years of marriage to Morgan had taught her to think of herself as a failure, as a woman who couldn't do anything right. Thomas helped her find a job. A small family restaurant was looking for a part-time waitress. The owner, an elderly Italian woman named Rosa, was known for giving jobs to women in difficult situations. "I have simple rules," Rosa said during the interview. "Be on time, be polite to customers, don't steal. You'll learn everything else." The work was hard after the hospital, but Nicole was grateful for it. For the first time in many years, she was earning her own money and making her own decisions. The customers were kind to her. Some recognized her. The freezer incident had made the local news, and treated her with special sympathy. But sometimes, especially at night, Nicole thought about how Dr. Hart had lied to her. Morgan hadn't been arrested. She could feel it. If he had been caught, she would have known the details. There would have been a trial, questions, the need to testify. So he was still at large, so the danger was not over. The thought haunted her until one morning she saw a headline in the local newspaper she was reading during her break at the restaurant. Body of man, wanted for attempted murder, found. Nicole read the article twice. Morgan Kelly had been found dead near the hospital, stabbed to death. The police were looking for suspects. Detective Coleman was asking witnesses to come forward. She put the newspaper down with trembling hands. Morgan was dead, truly dead. She was free. But who killed him? And why did Dr. Hart lie to her, saying he had been arrested? That evening, Detective Coleman came to see her at the shelter. "Miss Kelly, I need to ask you a few questions about your husband." "Of course." They sat down in the small, quiet living room. "Have you read today's newspaper?" "Yes." "How did you react to the news of your husband's death?" Nicole paused, as if considering her answer. "Relief," she said finally. "It sounds awful, but I feel relieved. Now I know he can't hurt me anymore." "I see. Did you know that Morgan came to the hospital on the night of the murder?" "Number. Why would he come there?" "We think he was looking for you. He had your hospital card with your room number on it." Nicole turned pale. "Did he want to finish what he started in the freezer?" "It looks that way, but someone stopped him." "Who?" "We don't know yet." "Can you think of anyone who might have wanted to protect you from your husband?" Nicole thought about it. Many people at the hospital knew her story. Dr. Hart, the nurses, other doctors. Thomas had visited her several times. Even Detective Coleman himself had come to check on her. Maybe someone from the hospital staff? They all knew what he had done. Possibly. "Miss Kelly, where were you on the night of the 23rd to the 24th between midnight and 2 in the morning?" The question sounded formal, but Nicole understood its meaning. "At the hospital, in my room. I was still having trouble walking and was on strong painkillers. I slept most of the night." "Who can confirm that?" "The night nurse. She came in to check on me several times." Coleman nodded, taking notes. After the detective left, Nicole sat in her room at the shelter, staring out the window. Morgan was dead. She was free. And no one would ever know the truth about what had happened that night, because the truth was more complicated than the police could have imagined. Detective Coleman sat in his office, studying the case file on the murder of Morgan Kelly. It had been 2 weeks since the body was found, and the investigation had reached a dead end. No witnesses, no clear clues, no obvious suspects. But something about the case bothered him. Too many coincidences, too convenient for everyone involved. Coleman took the crime scene photos out of the folder and studied them carefully once more. Morgan's body, the knife nearby, no signs of a struggle. Professional work or a lucky coincidence? He picked up the phone and dialed the hospital number. "Can I speak to the night nurse who was on duty in the ward 2 weeks ago, on the 23rd? A few minutes later, Nurse Patricia Morgans came to the phone. "Yes, I remember that night. It's terrible what happened to that man. Tell me, did you check on the patient Nicole Kelly that night?" "Of course. She was under special observation after such an injury." "How often did you check on her?" "Every 2 hours. At 10 o'clock in the evening, at midnight, at 2 and at 4 in the morning. And she was always in the ward?" The nurse paused. "Patricia, this is important. Was she in her room during all the checks?" "Well, she wasn't there at midnight. I thought she was in the bathroom. When I came back half an hour later, she was asleep in her bed. She looked very tired." Coleman felt his heartbeat quicken. "Are you sure it was midnight?" "Yes. I remember it clearly because I was surprised. She usually woke up when I came in, but that night, she was sleeping very soundly." After talking to the nurse, Coleman went to the hospital. He walked from Nicole's room to the service entrance, timing himself. 3 minutes at a brisk pace. For a frail woman recovering from hypothermia, it would have been difficult, but possible. At the service exit, he met Dr. Hart. "Detective, anything new on the case?" "Maybe." "Doctor, when you went out for a smoke that night, are you sure you didn't see anyone?" "I already told you it was quiet." "Did you notice if any of the patients left the building?" Dr. Hart frowned. "Patients don't have access to the service exits. It's against the rules. But technically possible?" "Technically, yes. But why would a patient go outside at night?" Coleman didn't answer. Instead, he asked to see the hospital records for medication dispensed that night. The log showed that Nicole had received a strong painkiller at 10 p.m., strong enough to keep her asleep all night. But the nurse said she wasn't in her room at midnight. Coleman returned to the station and requested surveillance footage from nearby buildings. The hospital was in the city center, surrounded by many shops and offices with CCTV systems. On the footage from a gas station camera across from the hospital, he saw what he was looking for. At 11:47 p.m., a woman in a hospital gown came out of the hospital's service entrance. The quality of the recording was poor, but the size and gait matched Nicole's. At 12:23 a.m., the same figure returned to the hospital. That was enough time to walk to the murder scene, commit the crime, and return. But the most important piece of evidence was found in the hospital laundry room. Coleman asked to check all the clothes that had been sent for laundry that night and the next morning. On one of the hospital gowns, marked from room 247, Nicole's room, experts found microscopic traces of blood. The blood type matched Morgan Kelly's. Coleman knew this evidence wasn't enough to make an arrest, but it was enough for a serious conversation. He arrived at the shelter in the evening when Nicole was returning from her job at the restaurant. She looked better. Her complexion had improved, she had gained weight, and she had learned to smile again. "Miss Kelly, I need to talk to you." Officially, they went into the same living room where they had talked 2 weeks earlier, but now the atmosphere was different. "Nicole, I know you killed your husband." She didn't answer, but something in her eyes changed. The mask of victimhood began to slip. "I have a witness who saw you leaving the hospital that night. I have video footage. I have a gown with your husband's blood on it." Nicole sat silently, staring at the floor. "Would you like to tell me what really happened?" There was silence in the room for a long time. Then Nicole raised her head. "I didn't plan to kill him," she said quietly. "When the nurse said he had come to the hospital, that he was somewhere nearby, I knew he would never stop." "How did you know he was at the hospital?" "Dr. Hart saw him at the service entrance. She came to my room and said Morgan was here, that he had come for me. That security was looking for him, but the hospital was big." Coleman nodded. "So Dr. Hart knew Morgan was there but didn't tell the police. What happened next?" "I realized that if he got to me, he would kill me. This time he would definitely kill me, and that I would never have another chance to stop him." Nicole stood up and walked to the window. "The medicine they gave me didn't work. I was used to strong painkillers even before the hospital. Morgan sometimes gave me pills after he beat me, so I could go to work. That's why you didn't sleep. That's why I could walk and think clearly. When the nurse left after checking on me, I took a spare gown from the closet and went to look for Morgan." "Where did you get the knife?" "From the hospital kitchen. They don't lock it at night. I knew where everything was. I worked in the hospital cafeteria many years ago, before I got married." Nicole turned to the detective. "I found him at the service entrance. He was smoking, waiting, probably thinking about how to get inside." "What happened when you met?" "At first, he didn't believe I was standing in front of him. He thought he was hallucinating. Then he realized it was true and was happy. He said that now he could finish what he started." Nicole's voice became firmer. He described to me what he was going to do, in detail. How he would kill me slowly so that I would suffer. How he would then disappear and no one would ever find my body. And then you hit him. Then I realized I had a choice. I could let him kill me as he planned, or I could kill him first. Nicole sat down again. You know what the scariest thing is? It was easy. Surprisingly easy. One move, and 14 years of nightmare were over. Why didn't you ask for help? Didn't you call security? Because help doesn't always come. Because the system doesn't always work. How many times has the police come to families with domestic violence and left without doing anything? How many women have died waiting for the system to protect them? Coleman understood her logic, but the law was the law. Nicole Kelly, you are under arrest on suspicion of the murder of Morgan Kelly. When he read her rights, Nicole did not resist. She seemed almost relieved that the truth had finally come out. A few months later, Nicole Kelly's case became one of the most talked about in the county. The defense attorney insisted on self-defense, the prosecutor on premeditated murder. Dr. Hart, Thomas Wright, and the women from the shelter testified for the defense. They all talked about what Nicole had been through, the 7 days in the freezer, the years of psychological and physical abuse. The prosecutor, however, pointed out that Nicole left the hospital room with the intention of finding her husband and was armed with a knife. According to his version, it was a planned murder, not spontaneous self-defense. After 3 days of deliberation, the jury reached a compromise verdict, guilty of second-degree manslaughter with mitigating circumstances. The judge sentenced Nicole to 18 months in prison with the possibility of early release after 9 months for good behavior. The court recognizes the exceptional circumstances of this case, the judge said in his sentencing statement. The defendant experienced extreme violence and was in a state of real danger to her life. However, the law cannot sanction vigilante justice, even in such circumstances. On the day of sentencing, Nicole stood in the courtroom surrounded by people who supported her: Dr. Hart, Thomas, Rosa from the restaurant, women from the shelter. When the sentence was announced, a sigh of disappointment rippled through the courtroom, but Nicole seemed calm. 8 years, she whispered to her lawyer. I can handle it. After 7 days in a freezer, I can handle anything. A week later, Nicole was transferred to a minimum security women's correctional facility 200 miles from Ventura. Dr. Hart visited her every month. Thomas came less often, but wrote regularly. Even Rosa from the restaurant sent a package of Italian sweets and promised to keep her job for her until she returned. How are you feeling? Dr. Hart asked during one of her visits, 6 months after the sentencing. For the first time in many years, I know that tomorrow will be the same as today. No one will yell at me, hit me, or control my every move. Even here, I am freer than I was with Morgan. 5 years later, Nicole was released early for good behavior. Thomas Wright was there to meet her on the day of her release. The world outside the prison walls seemed brighter and louder than she remembered. Ready to start over? He asked as they drove back to Ventura. Ready, Nicole replied, looking out the window at the fields and farms passing by. But now it will be my life, not the one someone else is building for me, not the one I'm running from. Mine. That evening, in the same small apartment her friends had kept for her, Nicole sat by the window, looking out at the lights of Ventura. Morgan was dead. Prison was behind her. She had paid her debt to society. The price of freedom had been high. 9 months behind bars, the stigma of murder that would remain with her forever. But looking at her reflection in the window, Nicole saw neither a victim nor a criminal. She saw a woman who had managed to stand up for herself when it really mattered. It started to rain outside, washing the dust off the streets of Ventura and giving the city a fresh start. Tomorrow, Nicole would return to work for Rosa, continue therapy with her psychologist, and perhaps help other women at the shelter. She had paid for her choice. Now, it was time to rebuild her life.